Hi everyone, my name is Hayden Alexander Butcher. Welcome back to Hangin' Vibe. So in the morning, we had a guest preacher named Jeff DeBoer. He preached on James chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. This was about trials. Verses 16 through 18 teach us that God has a purpose behind giving us trials. His trials are a perfect gift. And just kind of browsing through my notes here, I think the main point of this passage is to teach us that trials are not a form of punishment. So when God gives us trials, it's to grow us. So sometimes we're tempted when we receive trials, we're tempted to think, this is because I did something. If I had done things differently, this wouldn't be happening. There will be a link to the sermon in the description, so check that out because it's been so long that I don't really remember. It's not fresh on my mind, so I can't give a very good summary of the sermon. In the evening, Jonathan preached on Psalm 13, which is all about the question, how long? And we see three things about the question. First of all, it's a Godward question. The psalmist is asking God this question. And it's good for us to do that when we feel like God is distant. We ask him because we know that he's not. Secondly, it is an inward question. And that's seen in verse 2 when he says, how long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? It's basically asking, how long will I be alone and have to take counsel with myself and not have any friends, not have anyone who cares about me? Then thirdly, it's an outward question. Verse 2 also says, how long shall my enemy be exalted over me? So he's saying, how long will I be defenseless? One interesting note that Jonathan pointed out is that these psalms are the psalms that Jesus prayed. And so when Jesus prayed these words, we must remember how Jesus was betrayed by his friend Judas. The second point of the sermon, after we discussed the question, was the response. And at first we look to God's response, which is that there is none. God doesn't respond in this psalm. We can kind of infer that the answer from God's perspective to the question, how long, is just a little longer. But we also see David's response, which he preaches to himself in verses 5 and 6. He says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. So David looks to God's past faithfulness and how he has dealt with him in the past, and he trusts him to deal graciously with him in the future. So a few life updates from this week. First of all, this was the week I found out that I had to move back to my old house. I was living at my grandma's house, and it just didn't work out financially and didn't work out with my uncle. So we ended up having to move me back to my old house. I didn't move back until the following week, but at the end of that week, we did move Haley into her new house. So Haley is now living with a couple of her friends as roommates. And that was also the weekend I went camping. First, Grim and I drove up to Twin Oaks Campground, which is somewhere. Can't remember the name of the city, but it's up north. So We went camping there. It rained like crazy, so I got very wet, and so did Grim. But we saw some turkeys while we were up there. That was pretty cool. Some turkeys just kind of waltzed into the campground, and got to see them. The following day, we drove up to Traverse City. We went to this place called The Village at the Commons, which is like a kind of a mall. So they had stores and stuff that they actually let you bring your dogs to. So I took Grim inside with me and we did some shopping. And then they have some hiking trails that we went on. We walked along the hiking trails. And in the area where the trails are, there is a landmark called the Hippie Tree, which is actually on Google Maps. It's kind of funny, and it's just a tree that has fallen over and people have spray painted all over it. So we walked around and looked at the spray paintings on the tree. Further down the trail there was this like fairy village, which was kind of cool. There were all these little like birdhouses and just houses that people decorated and stuff. Those were fun to look at. There was also a botanical garden, which is pretty cool. And this little labyrinth, when I saw it on the map, I thought the labyrinth was going to be more impressive, but it was just one of those like circles on the ground with like just kind of bricks laid out in the shape of a labyrinth. So after that, we went back to the village at the Commons, and I got some food from a food truck called Heart and Soul, which was a Korean food truck. And I got this rice bowl with some veggies and meat, and I got a beer at a brewery called Earthen Ales, and that was pretty good. From there, we went to Holland State Park, and I camped there for the night. In the morning, I stopped at Kin Coffee, which was the coffee shop that I stopped at last year when I was in Holland, and I got the windmill cookie latte. That was very delicious. And then we went into town and looked at some tulips for tulip time. We saw the Dutch dancers. Grim got a picture with them, which was really cute. And yeah, then we walked around and went to the windmill on the waterfront and looked at some more tulips. And that was my trip. So now, this week, I will talk about my music. First song I'm going to talk about is called Novaya Zemlya from my album Hope. And this has a nice MIDI guitar riff and a cool feedback melody. Some nice piano comes in. And then there's some more beautiful feedback melodies in the second half. The next song is also from Hope, and it's the song Groundhog's Day. There's some pretty violin and xylophone. And then some nice piano. A cool synth bass comes in. There's a beautiful guitar melody in the second half. And then some more nice violin. The song Storm from Caliber. This one has a cool time signature. It's in 12/4. There's an energetic synth line and some sweet synth bass. There's an epic chord progression in the second half with some cool ethereal choir vocals. Zephyr from this album has a cool ethereal synth and a nice beat with some record scratching. Then this really awesome bass comes in. And then a nice sine wave melody. And Scraps from this album is also pretty cool. It has a quiet synth bass line, a nice synth lead melody. Then at one point the bass gets distorted and sounds really cool. And then some more beautiful synth melodies come in. Behind Me from the album 135 has a pretty sine wave melody and some deep bass. And a cool beat comes in. It sounds pretty lo-fi. And the rest of the track is pretty repetitive. I always consider this track kind of unfinished, but I doubt I'll ever really finish it, but it's kind of neat by itself. The song So Much Has Changed from Sequester has a nice synth melody. Leads to a cool chorus, kind of. I mean, there's no vocals, but I guess you would consider it a chorus. And I like the chord progression at the end of the chorus. And then there's this cool tape rewinding sound effect that leads to the next verse section, which has some beautiful synth pads. This section kind of reminds me of C418. See Nothing from Shadow Day. This one has an eerie sonar-like synth melody. It has some cool distant sounding drums. Then it cuts to a cool glitchy synth part. Then it comes back with this lovely chord progression in the second half. And there's a recording of me shaking a pill bottle as like a form of percussion. I was kind of inspired by the percussion in the song Left Side Drive by Boards of Canada. So I wanted to have that kind of shaker sound effect, which I achieved with a pill bottle. Jaded from also that album. It's actually a remix of the song See Nothing. Has kind of a glitchy sound, and there's some cool heavy bass in the middle. The song Plant a Seed, it's kind of a single. It's unlike anything else I've made because it's just solo piano, just recorded all in one take. It has a pretty chord progression. And in the second half, it switches to a minor key, which is kind of cool. Underscore from the Breaks B-sides has a cool bass line. And then there's a awesome kind of dubstep chorus. There's a nice ethereal synth melody. And then this cool reversed bass fill leads to a cool beat. White Dragon from the Breaks, I've mentioned this track before. This one has an ethereal intro with an awesome chord progression and some really sweet synth melodies. I like the part when the beat cuts out and then it kind of comes back in. Then there's an awesome quiet part with the melody shifted like a measure. So like I guess I don't know how else to describe it. The melody just kind of shifts a measure, so it's playing a different melody kind of. And then there's this nice 8-bit sounding melody in the second half, and then some cool violin. Crisp from the Breaks has a pretty chord progression. Then an awesome melody comes in. There's a cool, like, kind of beeping sound in the melody in the second verse section. And then it has a very beautiful slow outro. Next track is Open from the album Movement. This one has a nice synth pad intro. Some pretty piano comes in. And then a cool synth line. Then there's this distorted drum loop that comes in. and a nice tremolo synth pad in the second half. Morning Dew is also cool. It has a beautiful intro. Some nice bass comes in with the beat. And then a cool synth melody comes in. And there's this beautiful bell-like melody at the end. Blossom also has some cool elements. There's like some live synth. What I mean by that is I just recorded it live, me playing the synth melodies. They weren't programmed. I was just playing them. Then this cool pipe-like melody comes in. And another awesome melody comes in then. And this one has a gorgeous outro with some like ringing melodies. Elytra is a really cool track from this album. It has a sweet synth chord progression in the opening. And a beautiful synth melody and some bass when the beat comes in. And there's this cool vocoder sample with some chopped up vocals. Then a cool distorted beat comes in with a beautiful synth melody. The chord progression from the intro repeats, and it sounds pretty cool when combined with the distorted beat. And then this track has an ethereal outro, which is just the track Jumping Spider in reverse, with like an eerie tremolo effect on it. And lastly, the track Chrysalis, which has a beautiful piano loop. Some nice synth pads come in. And then there's a lovely staccato synth melody. So that was this episode. I always like to share my music, and I hope you all like to listen to my music. I'll put links to download everything in the description, so check that out and stay tuned for the next episode. whenever that comes out. See you all later.